Well, good evening. Oh, is the mic not working? I said good evening. I didn't hear anything back. Good evening. Oh, that's so much better. All right, I was just worried. They told me this was the most vibrant Catholic campus ministry in the country. Is that right? So I'm a bit biased because this is the Catholic campus ministry that includes our son Patrick, and we know Father Farrell, his family, his parishioners at our parish, St. Mary the Immaculate Conception, down in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And I just want to personally begin by thanking each and every one of you for being a part of this ministry. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, not only for what you do to create an amazing environment that our son is thriving in, but also, as I travel all around the country, I hear from people all the time talking about the Mason Catholic Campus Ministry as a shining example of hope in the church today. And that's because of each and every one of you. And some of you are saying, what are you talking about? I just got here, I'm a freshman. You are now part of the most dynamic Catholic campus ministry, certainly in the mid-Atlantic part of our country, and some would argue in the entire United States. So thank you for that. So I was asked to come in this evening and share with you on the topic of courageous Catholicism and how you can actually thrive and make a difference amidst change and challenge. Who's experienced any change or challenge over this last couple of years? I mean, has anybody had it? Oh, okay, I see a couple of hands, so maybe this will be a relevant topic. Well, I don't know about you, but this last 2 years has been crazy. We look around at, global pandemic, lockdowns, masks, vaccines. We look at all of that. We look at one of the most tumultuous presidential elections in history. We look at racial tensions that have boiled up. We've looked at everybody in America seems to be angry at each other and yelling at each other about everything. Social media news feeds are just on fire. We look at what's going on, regrettably, in Afghanistan as we see horrific things happening after pulling out. We've seen some really challenging stuff over this last year and a half to 2 years all around us. But that's just the culture. If we look at the church, we realize there's a whole nother array of challenges and changes going on. We look at all that is good and virtuous and holy in our world, and it's under unprecedented attack like we've not seen, certainly in my lifetime, and I would argue even much longer than that. But it's not just the forces on the outside. We see challenges on the inside of the church. We see scandal. We see sin. We see people that we put our trust in that let us down. We see divisions and arguments even amongst the church. We're in a very, very difficult time. And you may say to me, well, David, those are all external things, but let me tell you about what's going on in my life. Maybe for some of you, you had a really tough year last year, attending class online, being socially distanced, and feeling isolated an entire year. And now suddenly everything's changing. It's opening up again, but there are still challenges. Or some of you say, well, I just left high school and I'm just beginning this season of college, and that's a huge change. Everything is different. I left what I knew. I'm going into something I don't know. Others, maybe for you, you've just ended a bad relationship. Or maybe you're having some health challenges that you've never experienced before. Maybe for you, you've got a class that looks like it's going to be really, really tough, and you're worried about it. Maybe things aren't so good back at home. Maybe your parents are struggling. Maybe you come from a broken family. Maybe there's some sin that you're trying to work through in your own life. All of us are facing challenge. And all of us are continuing to experience change, and it seems more rapidly than ever before. And you know what? That's always been the case, and it will always be the case. What we have to decide is not to worry about what happens to us, but instead worry about how we handle it. What do we do with the challenges, with the changes we've been given? And I believe this is a divine opportunity for courageous Catholicism. I believe the world needs the truth of Jesus Christ now more than ever before, and we are the people who have been given this opportunity, this obligation to bring the light of Christ to a dark world that is facing these challenges and these changes. And that's what those who have gone before us have done to be courageous Catholics. What about a young man who He was born, and by the time he was 8 years old, his mother died. A few years later, when he was 12, his only sibling died of disease. And then in the midst of the next few years, by the time he turned 19, his country was forcibly invaded and occupied by an enemy, and he witnessed oppression, persecution, people in his neighborhood being killed, including 11 priests from right in his area. A year after that, his father passed away. He was left without a family. And then over those next few years, he heard a call, and he began to discern the priesthood. And his strength was Jesus Christ, but he also constantly sought the intercession of our Blessed Mother to guide him along the way. And at 26 years old, he was ordained to be a priest. But his country was in turmoil yet again because the previous occupiers had handed over his nation to the communist regime. And so now all of a sudden, everything was under scrutiny. Everything he did, there was vulnerability, there was risk. Everything was being monitored, everything was under surveillance. And he saw all around him members of the clergy just mysteriously disappearing. False witnesses came forth against priests, accusing them of things they didn't do, destroying their reputations. Some, for living out their faith, were assassinated. Amidst all of this change and challenge, this young man experienced very real fear. But he realized that he needed to live beyond that fear, and he needed to have faith. And so he continued on his priestly journey, and he was rapidly promoted over those next few years. And year after year, he continued to answer the call that Jesus had given him to continue to entrust his life to our Blessed Mother. On October 22nd, 1978, in the Second College of Cardinals in that same year, he was elected Pope. And when he was elected, the words he said, and I quote, "With obedience and faith to Christ my Lord, and with trust in the Mother of Christ and the Church, in spite of great difficulties, I accept." And he took the name John Paul II. And I will never forget, this was before most of you were born, but Margaret and I will remember forever those pictures of when he came out on that balcony for the first time in 1978. I was 10 years old. And everybody, the throngs gathered in St. Peter's Square going, "Who is this guy? We've never even heard of him before." What? Krakow, Poland? We thought it was going to be one of these two cardinals from Italy. But no, it was a 58-year-old Karol Wojtyła. And as he gave his first words of address to the faithful gathered there, he identified the challenges that the church was facing. But he punctuated every challenge with the words, "Be not afraid." Be not afraid. He was calling upon the church to live out the faith courageously. And he was not saying we're going to live courageously in the absence of fear. He recognized that fear was very real. He'd lived it his whole life. But he realized that we needed to live beyond fear in faith and put our faith in Jesus Christ. And his pontificate revitalized the church, broke the back of communism, and changed the entire world. Be not afraid. Those were some challenges he went through. Those were some changes he experienced. And you may say, okay, I got nothing on some of those, but you have real challenges. You have real changes you're going through. And for you, just like Karol Wojtyła, and just like every great saint, we are called for such a time as this to live out our faith courageously. And there are three principles that I think are vital for each of us as we strive for courageous Catholicism in such a way that we will thrive, but also that our life will make a difference to those around us. And those three principles are, number one, love God. Number two, live God. And number three, give God. I'm going to walk you through those three principles over our time together and unpack them a little bit and hopefully give you some practical things you can do to go forth from here even more courageously, even more on fire for your faith, being not afraid as you face change and challenge, which will continue. So first, love God. Love God. 25 years ago, my wife Margaret and I had a big fight, And what came out of that fight changed our life forever, and I would not be standing here with you tonight if it had not been for the fight and the good fruit that came out of that fight. So here's what happened. We were living a very worldly life. We went to Mass on Sunday, but really I was trying to climb the corporate ladder. I wanted to make millions in business. Margaret was a school teacher. She was winning all kinds of awards as a school teacher. But our faith was not really central to our lives, and we were just living a kind of selfish, worldly existence. We were involved somewhat with the Catholic campus ministry because we were attending the parish, St. Mary's in College Station at Texas A&M. And so we got asked to speak to a group of young married couples at the Catholic campus ministry. And we're like, "Well, that sounds fun. Sure, we'll do that." And then they told us the topic they wanted us to speak on. The topic was how to live out your values as a married couple. We're like, okay, we'll figure that out. Okay, we'll figure it out. So we procrastinated and procrastinated. And it's the night before the talk. And we're sitting on the bed arguing, fighting, because we don't have a clue what we're going to talk about. And finally it dawned on us the reason we're having such a struggle figuring out how do we tell these couples to live their marriage by their values is because we've never identified our values. How can we tell other people to do something we've never done? So out of desperation, I said, I just read something in a book. And this is actually the exact book. 25 years ago, I pulled this book out. I said, I just read a chapter. It's a business book about how to make millions. Of course, the kind of stuff I was reading. But there was one chapter where he talks about if you have business goals that are in conflict with your values, it's going to create problems. So he had a little exercise on how to identify your values. And I'm like, great, we have nothing else. Dive into this book. We'll do this little exercise. We'll teach that tomorrow. Check the box. We got the talk done. So we opened the book up. And what it suggested is get a blank sheet of paper. And on that piece of paper, get a pen, go in a room by yourself, and brainstorm everything in your life that you value. The big things, the little things, everything. Don't judge it, just capture it on paper, brainstorm, put it all. So Margaret and I said, okay, we're going to do this. We have to talk about it tomorrow night. So she went in one room, I went in another room, we got our piece of paper, we brainstormed out, and we filled our pages with all kinds of things. Things that we value, things that were important in our lives. So then we came back together and we went to the book and we looked up the next step in the exercise. And step 2 was, it said, now you need to prioritize your values. And said, treat it like this. Look at your sheet of paper and say, if everything on this piece of paper was ripped out of my life forever, but for one thing, what is the last thing you would give up, that you would die before you would give up? Put a number 1 by that. Now we're going, that's pretty serious. But we realize if we don't come up with something for a talk, we're in trouble. So we decide to take it that seriously. So we then read in the steps and says, then number 2, like what's the second most important thing that if you could only have those 2 things, what would be number 2 and number 3 and number 4? And basically it said, come up with your top 5 to 10. So we go off, we haven't looked at each other's papers, we go off into our separate rooms, and we go through and prioritize, and we take it very seriously. Okay, if everything was taken out of my life but for this, that's the one thing I could not live without. Number 1. And then number 2, number 3. Down to our top 10. So finally we come back together, and we have our sheets with our prioritized lists, and we're finding we can't, suspense is killing us, and we have to look at each other's sheets. And you know what was amazing? Our top 5 were identical. Number 1 for both of us was our faith in Jesus Christ, our relationship with God. Hands down, the most important thing that we identified in that values exercise. Number 2 was our marriage, our relationship as husband and wife. We'd only been married a few years at that point, but we realized that was very important. Number 3, we put children. Now, interestingly, at that point in time, we were struggling with infertility and didn't know whether we were going to be able to have children. But we thought, God willing, if we're blessed to have children, that would be number 3. Number 4 was our mission of how we serve others in the world. And then everything else fell down below that. Everything else. Money, titles, where we lived, who we hung out with, physical fitness, all of that fell down below those values. We thought, wow, this is pretty profound. But then there was one more step in the exercise, and this is where our life had to change. Because it said, now take your list, your top 10, and put the letter A by where you spent the most time, focus, and intention last week. I looked down my list and it was about number 9. A. Where'd you put the second most time, focus, intention? B, C, D. And when we both went through that exercise, we realized that our lists were literally flip-flopped. We said these were the things we valued the most, but they were getting the least time, the least attention, the least focus in our lives. And the things we said were less important were consuming our lives. And we realized we're living a lie. We say we believe this, but we're living something different. And we had a decision. Will we keep living the lie, now knowing that it's a lie, or will we change? And we chose the path of change. Everything in our life changed because of that. And the visual that I used to think about this in my own mind, and I know some of you are not going to be able to see this, you're wondering, what? Are we getting champagne after the talk tonight? I don't know if any of you have ever been to a wedding reception at a fancy country club or hotel, or maybe you've seen this some old movie, where they had the much bigger than this, the tall pyramid of champagne glasses. How many of you have ever seen that, either in a photo, a movie, or something? Okay. So essentially what happens, it's much bigger than this, the guy or the gal who works at the event facility comes out with the first bottle of sparkling wine or champagne. And usually it's so tall they have to climb up a ladder, and they go up to the top, and they pour the champagne into the top glass. This is empty. Don't worry, there will be no accidents on the rug up here. They fill up that top glass, and then what happens? It spills over. And because it's filled up, it overflows, and it spills down into the second tier, the second level of glasses, and they start to fill up. And they continue to pour champagne, and those glasses fill, and they overflow. And it spills down to the next tier, and those glasses fill, and they overflow, and overflow, and overflow. And over time, by pouring bottle after bottle after bottle into that same glass on the top, every single champagne glass is filled, everybody takes one, and there's a big party. It's beautiful to see. But imagine for a moment, the person with the bottle had a really bad day. They're experiencing some challenges and changes. And they come in and go, I am not climbing that ladder today. I'm done with that. I'm sick of that glass up at the top. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a glass down at the bottom. And they pour the champagne in, and that glass fills up. It overflows, and it spills on the floor. They can pour bottle after bottle after bottle. They will never fill up all the other glasses, will they? Okay, they say, all right, I realize my mistake. I'm not going to start at the bottom, but I'm not going to start at the top. And they start about halfway down. And they pour in the champagne, and that glass fills. It spills over. A few glasses below it fill up. A few glasses below that fill up. And some of the glasses are full, but there will never be fullness in that pyramid of champagne glasses unless they start with the glass at the top. They have to put first things first. And that is an example, a model, a visual of how we have to live our lives. Because if we put God first in our lives, if we put our relationship with Him at the very, very top, will that spill over, and will we be better spouses if we're called to the sacrament of matrimony? Or will we be better priests? Will we be better sisters? Will we be better parents to our children? Will we be better friends? Will we be better students? Will we be better workers, employees? Everything will be better if we put first things first and fill that up and let it spill over into every facet of our life. But if we start anywhere else but there, our lives will not be full. There will be holes that are going to be unfilled, holes that need Jesus Christ in them. How do we fill the glass on the top? It's love. Margaret and I were out on a walk yesterday morning. We go out walking most mornings now, one of the perks of being empty nesters. Sorry, Patrick. And we were talking about loving God. And I asked Margaret, I said, Margaret, how practically do we grow in our love of God? And she said, well, it's a relationship. And how do you grow a relationship? You spend time. So how do we fill up the most important glass that will spill over into every other part of our life? We invest time. We invest intention into it. We build a relationship with Jesus Christ. Our Savior who came to earth and died on a cross to carry our sins and loves us enough to offer us a path to eternal salvation, that's worth investing some time in. And for you, love God starts with time. That time is at Mass. Mass on Sundays and Mass like what we just had during the week as well. That time, that love of God grows as we spend time with Him in adoration, in the presence of Jesus Christ in the Blessed Sacrament. That love of God grows when we spend time with Him in sacred Scripture, in Bible studies, through involvement in the Catholic campus ministry. You can grow in your love of Jesus Christ by spending more time with Him, and that love of God will fill up the most important part of your life. And then that is what's going to start to spill over. So the first thing I challenge you to do is to love God. Go through your own life. Brainstorm your values, the things that are important. Look at all of them, and I can promise you there is no other thing on that list that can fill every other part of your life but for the relationship with Jesus Christ, for your faith. So start by putting first things first. Love God actively. Spend time with Him. Let Him fill up your life and let it spill over into all the other areas of your life. The second principle, after we love God, we have to live God. If all we do is spend all the time at the top, there are a lot of other areas of our life that He needs to be actively present in. And we have to live out our faith on a daily basis. For Margaret and me, we realized that right after our relationship with God was our vocation. In our vocation, we were called to the vocation of marriage and family. That's our calling. And for many of you, that will likely be your calling. But there are some here who God may be calling you right now to be a priest. God may be calling you to be a religious sister. God may be calling you to be a brother or a single consecrated virgin. Who knows? God's got a plan, but you have to actively work to discern what that is and allow God's love that fills up in you to spill over into discerning and then living out your vocation. For Margaret and me, once we went through that values exercise, once we said we've got to change everything in our life, things didn't get easier. They got harder at first, but they got more rewarding long term. Because all of a sudden I realized I had been treating my customers in my sales job many times better than Margaret because, well, they were my paycheck. And I would come home and dump on her at the end of the day, and I said, it's got to change. She's the most important person in my life. God entrusted her to me and me to her, and our path to holiness is intertwined together. We are called as husband and wife in sacramental matrimony. And so we began, just like our time to love God, our love grew by spending time together. And we proactively dated each other and continue to this very day. The day we dropped Patrick off for this semester at Mason, we were like, woohoo, see you. We went into D.C. and we had a date night and stayed at a hotel. It was awesome. I still date this woman because after 29 years of marriage, I love her more today than the day that we said I do. We are best friends and we love every minute we have together. But that's because we put God first and let Him spill into our marriage. And He'll do the same for you in your vocation. But then after marriage, we had the areas of children. I mentioned that we were struggling with infertility. And we said, well, if God wants us to be radically open to life, and the church has called us to understand that our marital intimacy is both unitive but also procreative, and we were struggling in that area, we had to at least be open to what could God do to give us the gift of children. And so we realized that our infertility was a problem, and we actively sought out natural family planning, not to avoid a pregnancy, but hoping to achieve a pregnancy, because after 5 years of trying, we still were not pregnant. And that search led us to Dr. Thomas Hilgers at the Pope Paul VI Institute in Omaha, Nebraska. And our local NFP instructor, Randy, he said to us, he said, your charts show that you've got some serious issues here. It looks like it could be endometriosis. There could be some polycystic ovarian disease. There's a lot of things going on here. He said, really, if you want the best chance of being able to conceive a child, I recommend that you go up to Omaha and let Dr. Hilgers himself do the surgery that's needed. He said it's going to be at least a week. It'll probably cost you about the same amount as buying a car, and most insurance companies don't cover it. We looked at each other and for a fleeting second said, what are we going to do? And then realized it's obvious. Which do we value more? The gift of a child or a car that will rust out in a few years and get dented and scratched up? It was a no-brainer. We said, we're going. And we went on faith. And we went to Omaha, and Dr. Hilders did the surgery on Margaret, and he went in through laparoscopy and burned out the endometriosis and helped get her on various different hormones to help. At the end of our time there, he pulled us into his office and he said, David and Margaret, I've got to tell you that I think you're going to be able to achieve a pregnancy, but it's going to take a while. It could take 6 months, could take 18 months or more. What I'd recommend is if a year and a half from now you haven't conceived, you come back and see me. And we're just seeing the dollar signs floating through our head. But we're trusting God. We're putting our faith first, our marriage second, this openness to life third. And we went home. And 30 days later, Margaret was pregnant with our daughter, who is today a novice in the Nashville Dominicans, our daughter, Sister Gloria Christi. What an incredible blessing. And it was a challenging pregnancy. Margaret was on progesterone shots throughout the entire time. It was painful, and the nurses and the people drawing her blood were like, why are you doing this? And she was able to share with them. Because I value God, I value my marriage, and I value children. And when she was born, her picture went on the miracle baby wall at Dr. Hilders' Pope Paul VI Institute. Several more years, more infertility challenges. We realized we needed Dr. Hilders again, and so we called, and he helped Margaret, and she once again conceived. And he helped through another very difficult pregnancy, and that was Patrick. And when he was born, another photo was sent to Pope Paul VI Institute, another miracle baby. But that was because we had said, put first things first. But also then, we realized that my desire to go out and change the world by making millions of dollars, that was not driven by a love of God, love of family. It was very selfish. And I started to say, God, what do you want me to do in my work? What do you want in my mission that I'm supposed to do to serve others and help others? Down here, a little lower, but still far above a lot of the less important areas in life. And during this time, while we're wrestling with all of this, and I'm struggling in my pharmaceutical sales job, the word broke in our town that an abortion clinic was opening, the Planned Parenthood Center. And we were heartbroken. And I remember when we went to pray at the site where that facility was being built, and we realized children are going to die here. Women are going to be wounded at this place in our hometown. And we felt convicted to do something. And we began to take baby steps to get involved in that local pro-life effort, started by a 21-year-old church secretary named Lauren. We began to take baby steps. I served on the board of directors with them. And when Lauren, in 2001, after the abortion center had opened, she had had a baby and she felt called to be at home and to raise her child. And one day I was calling on doctors about 30 miles north of where I lived, and I was talking to Lauren on the phone, and she said, David, 10 more children died at Planned Parenthood today. June 26, 2001, 20 years ago, that was the day my heart finally broke. And I said, maybe I'm supposed to quit my lucrative sales job to do something to try to stop this. I was just talking, but then I remembered what we valued. And I went home and talked to Margaret, and she said, David, to whom much is given, much is required. And I turned in my 2-week notice and took a leap of faith and took the helm of that little local pro-life organization. That next year, the community came together and invested lots more hours, lots more dollars, and at the end of that year, I thought we were going to make huge impact, and abortions dropped by 2%. And I thought, we worked so hard, just 2%. And a priest friend of ours, he's a bishop today, he said, never underestimate what that 2% represents. Those are babies who are alive today because our community did something about the problem. And so the next year, more time, more energy, more dollars were invested. That year, abortions went down 15%. The next year, more time, more energy. But that year, it seemed like we hit a wall, and everybody was exhausted, and our community was just worn out. And so a group of us got together at a little local pro-life office out of desperation, saying, what do we do? And we decided for an hour to just pray and ask God what to do. Be careful asking God those kinds of prayers, and sometimes He'll show you. And during an hour of prayer, we felt led to do something for a 40-day time frame, very biblically significant time frame God uses to bring about transformation. And the 3 things that we felt led to do were, number 1, call our community to pray and fast, recognizing that we can't end these great injustices on our own, but God can. With him, all things are possible. Number 2, we felt led to hold a constant 24-hour-a-day prayer vigil outside of the abortion facility. Not yelling or judging or condemning, but simply praying and bringing God to that place where he's so urgently needed, where 2 or more gather in his name. And the third thing was to take the pro-life message all throughout our community. And a team of college students literally went door to door to every household in our college town over those 40 days. When we finished that hour of prayer and we had gotten a clarion call of what we were supposed to do, our mission for that moment, I was terrified. But I looked at the example of people like St. John Paul II. Be not afraid. Okay, we can do this. We have to do this. And we launched the first 40 Days for Life campaign. Over 1,000 people in our community participated. Abortions were reduced by 28% that year. And people from all across the country started calling us and saying, what happened? We heard about this. How can we do that? Well, we had moved right after that up here to Virginia. I was working for another pro-life group, but one by one, other cities kept saying, we want to replicate what we heard about. And so each of these cities saw the same kinds of results. One by one, more 40 Days for Life campaigns. And finally, in 2007, we realized God's up to something here. Why don't we try to join him in what he's doing? And we formed the national 40 Days for Life campaign thinking like, wow, a dozen or 15 cities might do this at once. And the first time out of the chute, 89 cities in 33 states participated. And the next time it was more, and the next time it was more. And to date, 40 Days for Life has now spread to more than 600 cities across 50 nations, all 50 American states. More than 750,000 volunteers have participated, and more than 19,000 lives have been saved from abortion. 200 abortion workers have had conversions and left the abortion industry, including the director of the Planned Parenthood facility that we started this at. Her name was Abby Johnson. Maybe you heard her story in the beautiful movie Unplanned. And we've seen well over 100 abortion centers that have closed their doors and gone out of business forever because God's people answered his call. That was my mission. That may be very different from yours. But to live God, we have to let him fill every part of our life. And for you, as you love God, as you let him fill you up, let him spill over into your vocation, into the mission that he calls you to, and into every area of your life, because when you do, it will be transformative not only for you, but it will make a difference for those around you. I'll never forget when our family, Patrick was there, we went to Croatia. And at that point, it was the fastest growing international location for 40 Days for Life. They had 13 campaigns going on all across this little country. It was one of the nations that broke up from the former Yugoslavia during the Baltic conflict back in the 90s. And when we went there, we flew into Zagreb, the capital city, and we met with Ante Chalkajic, a young school teacher who recognized there was a problem. Children were dying, women were being wounded in his city. The abortions were being performed at hospitals, so he signed up to lead a local campaign. And during that campaign, they saw several lives saved, and they saw a doctor who used to perform abortions have a change of heart and leave. And Auntie was like, this is amazing. And so he started to recruit people in other cities, and it spread to 3, and then to 6, and then to 13 cities. And so we traveled all over Croatia, in this amazing Catholic country that was under communist rule for 40 years. And the people there, daily mass was packed everywhere we went. The faith was on fire, and they were saying, you in America never take your religious freedom for granted, because we could not practice our faith. We couldn't even talk about our faith for 4 decades. We finally got it back. We treasure our faith, never take it for granted. But the most memorable moment of that trip for me was when I went. Margaret and the kids stayed in Zagreb because it was a long overnight trip. I went over to Vukovar, a city on the eastern border. It's right on the Danube River across from Serbia, and it was one of the hardest hit cities during the Balkan conflict. I met people who had been captured and held in prison camps. I met a woman, one of the sidewalk counselors, who had been raped by enemy combatants. They told me stories of family members being taken out in the fields and shot. But when we went to the hospital, there were more than 100 Catholics praying around the hospital, praying for an end to abortion and offering hope and help to anyone going in who is pregnant. And after we went to the vigil, they took me to a little house just a few miles from the hospital. And in the house, we were greeted by a woman in a bathrobe, which I thought was very strange. She didn't speak a word of English, but through a translator, she shared that months earlier, She had gone to that hospital pregnant, scared. She was in an abusive relationship. She had no money. She didn't know what to do. And so she felt her only way out was to go, have an abortion. And so she went to the hospital that day, and there were people praying. Faithful, courageous Catholics. And they offered to help her. And she said, I need a lot of help. They helped her get out of the abusive relationship, find housing, get medical care, get all the supplies she needed. And as she said through the translator, they were with me 2 weeks ago when I gave birth to my little baby girl, Petra. And she said to the translator, ask him if he'd like to meet Petra. And the translator asked me, and I said, I certainly would. And so a woman came in from another room in the house with this little 2-week-old baby girl in her arms. And she laid Petra in my arms, and I thought she was that close to being a statistic. What if people hadn't been praying? What if the school teacher Ante hadn't gotten fired up in Zagreb and spread this hope across this country? What if Catholics hadn't been there with this mother throughout her challenging time, through her changes, to say, you can do this. Be not afraid, we're with you. As I held that little Petra in my arms, I realized it's because of faithful Catholics that she's alive today, thousands of miles away from my very own home. Live God. After you love God, live God. And the third and final step for you is give God. To whom much is given, much is required. As God fills up your life, it's going to spill over beyond your pyramid of champagne glasses into the lives of others. You may be the only Catholic church some people ever experience. You may be the only Bible that somebody ever reads. There's somebody that needs your story. There's somebody that needs your invitation. All of those experiences I've shared with you up to this point happened to me while I was not Catholic. When Margaret and I met our second date, we went to Mass together. I thought, any girl who invites me on a second date, I'll go to Mass with her. You better believe it. She's beautiful. We went to Mass together the next week, and the next week. We went to Mass together for 28 years, and I was not Catholic. Our children were born. They were baptized in the faith. They were raised in the faith. They were on fire for their faith because of the example of their mother, but I was still not Catholic. I spoke twice at this campus ministry over the years when I was not Catholic. But something happened on September 8th of 2017 that was the final step on that part of my journey. I was driving a car from Texas to Virginia, the car that Patrick drives today, and I was making phone calls, talking to friends as I was driving, and one of the friends I was talking to while I was driving up through Bristol, Tennessee, and then Virginia, heading towards Fredericksburg, was my friend Brian. And Brian runs a pro-life group in St. Louis. He got started by leading a 40 Days for Life, left an engineering job, started an organization. They're doing amazing things in St. Louis. And so we were talking shop, and then at the end, Brian said, hey, he said, David, you know that I'm a Catholic convert. Yeah, I know that. He said, have you been to adoration lately? I said, no, I haven't been in a while. He said, well, I just say that because I just had this amazing experience in adoration just earlier today. He said, I was in adoration and just Jesus just poured his love into me during that time together. He said, but there were two things that I felt that I was supposed to tell you. He said, first, he said, Jesus put on my heart that I was supposed to tell you that I love you. He says, that's not like the kind of thing I would normally say. And he said, like a brother, of course. I said, yeah, got it. He said, but Jesus wanted me to tell you that I love you. I said, I appreciate that, Brian. He said, the other thing, I felt that Jesus wanted me to ask you, why aren't you yet Catholic? And I laughed and I said, oh, Brian, I've been asked that a lot over the years. Oh my gosh, the last time I was at the campus ministry at Mason, every student was asking me that. Not really, I didn't say that. But I mean, over my life, I've had lots and lots of people ask me that question. I'm laughing, I'm just kind of blowing it off. And Brian, a courageous Catholic, says, have you ever asked that question of our Lord in adoration? I said, no. He said, do it. I said, okay, when I get home, I'll find out when St. Mary's has adoration, and I'll fill out check out the schedule, and I'll sign up. And he's like, are you kidding me? No, you are not going to wait. This is too important. He said, have you ever heard of masstimes.org? Pull off to the side of the road, pull it up, find a parish that has adoration going on, go today and ask Jesus, this is too important. Margaret says, "That's a really good friend." He was courageous. And because of that, I stopped, I looked, I realized I was going to be going through Charlottesville. Our daughter was going to the University of Virginia at the time, and I said, okay, I'm going to go. Let's go to the Adoration Chapel. So I called Claire, and she was getting ready to go on a focus retreat for the weekend. She's like, "I'm not going to be here, but the Adoration Chapel's upstairs. Here's where to go." So I got there to St. Thomas Aquinas Parish, and I parked, and I went inside, and I went up to the Adoration Chapel, and there were 2 people in there, and me. And I walked in, and I got down on my knees, and it was just me and our Lord spending time together. And I said, "What do you want me to do?" For 1 hour, I just asked that question over and over. I didn't hear a voice. There were no neon signs. But I had a peace on my heart around one word, and that word was begin. Begin. I recognized that was not irony because our parish was starting RCIA the next Monday. I got back in my car, I drove home, I called Margaret down, I said, "Sit down, and I want you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is just the beginning of something. I have no idea where it's going to lead. You can't get too excited." I said, "I stopped at the Adoration Chapel, and I feel like I'm supposed to begin RCIA." She's getting all excited, she's bouncing up and down. If you know Margaret, really gets wired in these kinds of things. I said, "I can't promise what's going to happen. All I know is I'm supposed to start." So I went to my first RCIA class that following Monday by myself. And everybody else there had someone with them. So I went back home that night and I said, "Margaret, everybody had somebody with them. Would you want to come with me?" She's like, "Are you asking me to be your sponsor?" I'm like, "I think maybe that's what it means. I don't even know." Yes. So Margaret came with me, and over those next few months, week by week, I was wrestling with God over and over again, trying to resolve those few remaining issues. I'd talk with Patrick, I'd talk with our daughter Claire before she was Sister Gloria Christi, and I would just work through these questions, but I was still struggling. I was having a hard time letting go. Somebody asked me one time, they said, "What was the hardest thing? What was the last thing you had to overcome?" And I said, "I had to overcome me." I had gotten over apostolic succession and Mary and the real presence. I'd worked through all of that, but I finally realized the hang-up was me. I had to get me out of the way and put my faith in God. And here it was, Holy Thursday. The Easter Vigil is on Saturday, and I still don't know. Just to show you what a hard head I am. Margaret's like, "Do we need to call this off?" Her mother was coming in from out of town. I hadn't told anybody other than the people in our RCIA class. And I said, this chapter started in adoration, and I've got to go back. And so that night after Holy Thursday Mass, they had set up an adoration chapel in our parish hall. We processed over, and I had taken my car separately, and I said, "Margaret, kids, go on." Claire was at UVA, but Patrick, and I just spent hours there on my knees before our Lord, asking him that same question, "What do you want me to do?" And that night I was hoping for the neon sign. I was hoping for the finish line. Come on in. But that night, the only word that just kept floating through my head and my heart that I had a peace around was continue. Continue. And I thought, this is strange. What does that mean? And then finally it hit me like a lightning bolt. This isn't the end of my faith journey. It's just I'm turning the page from one chapter to the next chapter. I'm continuing on a life of loving God, living God, giving God to others. I just need to continue. And I went home and I told Margaret, and I said, "Easter Vigil, I'm in. I'm so excited. I can profess what I'm supposed to profess with absolute certainty and confidence." And I shared with her about continue, and I said, "This is going to be amazing." And a few nights later at the Easter Vigil, Margaret was there as my sponsor. My confirmation saint, of course, John Paul II. Our daughter was in the front row, and the altar server when I received my first communion was my son Patrick. And the graces that we received that evening were beyond description. Because Margaret had given her faith to me. Because our children had given their faith to me. And because a friend, a courageous Catholic, was willing to challenge me and to invite me. That's why I'm here as a passionate Catholic convert tonight. It's because people cared enough to give God. And for you, there are people that you will encounter, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, As you are loving God, as you are living God, you are going to be attractive to those people. And your invitation could be all that they need to begin a new journey of faith. And then they can continue on that journey of faith. Maybe it's somebody who's never been a Christian, and you can introduce them to the real person of Jesus Christ for the very first time. Maybe it's somebody who was raised in the faith but lost their way, and you can help them to come back. Maybe it's somebody who is part of a fallen away another faith tradition, or maybe they're not even Christian. Your invitation as you live God, as you love God, could be what they need as you give God for them to experience the fullness and the blessings that you are experiencing. Somebody needs your story. Somebody needs your invitation. Because when you give God, you will be giving the greatest gift that anyone can have. Love God, live God, give God. That's what courageous Catholicism looks like. I'll end with just one more story of another familiar figure, but one that I think speaks profoundly to what we need to do tomorrow and the next day. A girl who was born in 1910 by the name of Agnes, born in Albania. She felt the call and entered a religious order, and at age 19, she was a sister and she was assigned to India to be a school teacher. For the next 20 years, faithfully, she taught school. Until one day she was on a train and had a profound experience where she heard Jesus talking to her directly. Truly intimate, truly present. And she felt that Jesus was asking her to stop teaching and dedicate the rest of her life to serving the poorest of the poor. But it took 3 years of her begging her order, her bishop, and even Rome before finally it was approved that she could begin that new religious order today we know as the Missionaries of Charity. For the next decades, she built an order that served the poorest of the poor, the sick, the elderly, the addicted, the homeless, the dying, the lepers. And only after her death did we find out that through much of that time, she was living a dark night of the soul. She was struggling with challenges internally because after that profound encounter where she heard Jesus Christ speaking to her, for decades she felt distant from him. She felt alone. She struggled and wrestled with doubt. But she continued to serve because she was courageous, and she continued to let God live through her into the lives of others. And today, of course, we know her as not just Mother Teresa of Calcutta, but Saint Teresa of Calcutta. One of my favorite stories of Mother Teresa's life that I think speaks to all of us as a send-off, as a rallying cry, is what she said just a few miles from where we sit tonight. The year was 1982, and she had been asked to speak to the United States Congress, and while she was in town, she went by and spoke to the students at Bishop O'Connell High School. Can you imagine being in that auditorium when this little diminutive nun gets up there? Well, she didn't talk about her Nobel Peace Prize. She didn't talk all about her order and all the things that she had done or accomplished. The whole time she talked about Jesus and how Jesus had become poor by giving himself for us. And that if we want to love him and serve him, we need to serve those who are poor, those who are facing challenge, those facing change. And at the end of her comments, they had a few students ask questions, and one student raised his hand and he said, "Mother Teresa, how do we be more like you?" And her answer was profound. She said, "Find your own Calcutta. Find your own Calcutta." She wrote about it not long after that and elaborated on that thought when she said, "Find your own Calcutta. Stay right where you are. Find the sick, the suffering, the lonely, right where you are, in your own homes, in your own families, in your workplaces, in your schools. You can find Calcutta all over the world if you but have eyes to see. Everywhere, wherever you go, you find people unwanted, unloved, uncared for, rejected by society, forgotten, completely left alone. Find your own Calcutta." Your Calcutta at this moment in time is right across the street. It's George Mason University. and it's the community around you. There are people desperate right now for truth. There are people starving for love. There are people longing for hope. And you have all of that to share with them. My challenge to you is to love God. Put first things first. Spend time. Let God fill up your life so then it can spill over into every other facet beyond your relationship with Him. Live God. Discern your vocation. Understand your mission. Let God spill over into every part of your life so that He is central in everything. And that will be so attractive and radiant that people say, what is different? What's different about Pablo? What's different about Pedro? What's different about Nicole? They're going to say, what is different? There's something, there's a joy there. Everybody else is freaked out and stressed about everything going on, and they're happy. What is it? And they're going to be attracted to you. And then you have the opportunity to give God, to share your faith with others. And by doing that, you will renew the faith all across this community. You will see the faith alive in ways you never imagined on the George Mason campus, in Fairfax, throughout our Commonwealth. You will literally have the opportunity, through you loving God, living God, and giving God, to change the course of history in our nation and you. By being a courageous Catholic, by thriving, by making a difference amidst change and challenge, you truly can be an active participant in building God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. So go, be a courageous Catholic. Let's pray the St. Michael prayer again. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. St. Michael, the Archangel,
defend us in battle, be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we pray. And do thou, Prince of the heavenly hosts, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen.
Oh, we can do better about it. Another round of applause to Bereit. All right, the team now, Sister Gloria